For nearly a century, the Murdaugh name carried influence through courtrooms across South Carolina's Lowcountry. Their name carried influence through courtrooms, police departments, and small towns where power often mattered more than questions. Judges knew them, law enforcement knew them, prosecutors knew them, and in South Carolina Lowcountry, people understood that the Murdaugh name was not just respected, it was protected. For generations, that power appeared untouchable, until the night of June 7th, 2021. A humid summer night settled over Moselle, the Murdaugh family hunting estate. Darkness stretched across the property. Trees swayed in the warm South Carolina air. And near the dog kennels, two members of one of the region's most powerful families lay dead. Maggie Murdaugh and her son, Paul. At first, the murders looked like another brutal mystery. Possible revenge, possible enemies, possible retaliation connected to a deadly boat crash that had already placed the family under intense public scrutiny. But investigators soon discovered something far more unsettling. Because behind the image of wealth, status, and legal power was a life quietly collapsing under the weight of deception. Missing money, financial fraud, addiction, manipulation, and years of lies beginning to surface all at once. Because sometimes karma doesn't arrive suddenly, sometimes it waits, while someone spends years building the very life that will eventually destroy them. Hampton County, South Carolina, June 2021. A region of swamps, hunting land, old money, and deep family influence. The kind of place where generations of power become woven into the culture itself. And for decades, few families carried more influence than the Murdaughs. 3 generations of the family served as powerful prosecutors in the region. Their legal connections stretched across local courts and investigations for nearly 100 years. To outsiders, Alex Murdaugh appeared successful, confident, connected. A wealthy attorney continuing the legacy his family had built for generations. He lived on a remote hunting property with his wife Maggie and sons Buster and Paul. And the family hunted together, traveled together, socialized within the elite legal and business circles. From the outside, it looked like a life most people would never reach. But power can create something dangerous, the belief that consequences belong to other people. And according to prosecutors, that belief had been growing inside Alex Murdaugh for years. Maggie Murdaugh was often described by friends as warm, social, and deeply devoted to her family. Someone who tried to maintain stability as pressure around the family intensified. Paul Murdaugh, meanwhile, had become a controversial public figure after a 2019 boat crash. For many outside the family, he became associated with headlines, lawsuits, and public anger. But inside the Murdaugh household, he was still a son, still part of the family Alex and Maggie had built together. And by 2021, that family was already under enormous strain, civil litigation, and financial pressure. The kind of pressure that slowly changes the emotional atmosphere inside a home, long before anything finally breaks. Some stories begin with violence, others begin with an illusion, with carefully constructed reputations, with people who spend years convincing everyone around them that they can be trusted, until eventually, the illusion cracks. And once it does, everything underneath begins collapsing with it. Because the most dangerous lies are not the ones people tell others. They are the ones people successfully tell themselves. I'm Justin Luther, and these are the Karma Case Files. For generations, the Murdaugh family occupied a rare position inside South Carolina's Lowcountry. Their influence was legal, political, social, and deeply personal to the communities around them. People knew the family's name long before Alex Murdaugh was ever born. And in smaller southern communities, reputation can become a form of power all by itself. Alex eventually joined the family law firm and built a career handling personal injury cases. Friends and colleagues later described him as charismatic, emotionally persuasive, and easy to trust. Someone who would walk into a room and immediately make people feel comfortable. But beneath the surface, another reality was quietly developing. According to prosecutors, Alex Murdaugh had been stealing money from clients and associates for years. Millions of dollars, settlement funds, legal payments, money belonging to vulnerable people who believed they could trust him. Some clients had suffered catastrophic injuries, some had lost family members, some were financially desperate. And according to prosecutors, Alex Murdaugh used his position and influence to manipulate the very people who depended on him most. But for years, his public reputation survived, because some powerful people collapsed slowly, not all at once. Then came February 2019, and the first major fracture in the family's reputation. February 24th, 2019. In the early morning darkness, a boat carrying several young people crashed near Parris Island, South Carolina. 19-year-old Mallory Beach was killed. Investigators alleged Paul Murdaugh had been driving the boat while intoxicated. The tragedy immediately generated public outrage, and for the first time in years, serious scrutiny began surrounding the Murdaugh family itself. Lawsuits followed, media attention followed, questions followed. And according to prosecutors, Alex Murdaugh's financial world was already beginning to unravel behind the scenes. Civil litigation threatened exposure, exposure threatened discovery, and discovery threatened secrets prosecutors believed Alex had spent years hiding. Because lawsuits do something dangerous to people living double lives. They create paper trails, bank records, transactions, timelines, patterns. As the lawsuits surrounding the boat crash moved forward, the pressure surrounding Alex Murdaugh reportedly intensified behind the scenes. Every legal motion threatened exposure. Every financial question threatened discovery. And according to prosecutors, the reputation Alex Murdaugh had spent his life protecting was becoming harder to hold together. Then came the night of June 7, 2021. The night prosecutors argued the downfall turned violent. The Murdaugh family estate, June 7, 2021, just after 10 p.m. Alex Murdaugh called 911. "My wife and child have been shot badly." His voice sounded panicked, breathing heavily, telling dispatchers he had just arrived at the kennels and discovered the bodies of Maggie and Paul. Responding officers arrived to a scene that immediately felt unsettling. Emergency lights cut through the darkness surrounding the property while deputies moved between the kennels carrying flashlights. Humidity hung heavily over Moselle while investigators moved quietly between the kennels and surrounding tree line. Flashlights swept across the wet ground. Officers spoke in low voices, and somewhere beyond the property, the sounds of insects continued humming through the South Carolina night as if nothing happened at all. But for investigators standing at that scene, everything had already changed. Near the feed room, Paul Murdaugh's body lay close to the kennels. Maggie's body was discovered nearby. The violence stunned investigators. Paul had suffered shotgun injuries. Maggie had been shot multiple times with a rifle. 2 different weapons appeared involved, and almost immediately, investigators realized this was not going to be a simple homicide investigation. Several theories seemed possible. Retaliation connected to the 2019 boat crash, outside enemies, someone targeting the family. After all, the Murdaugh name carried both influence and resentment. But as investigators began reconstructing the timeline, small inconsistencies started appearing. And in murder investigations, small inconsistencies often become very large problems. Investigators reviewed phone records, vehicle data, call logs, surveillance timelines, and eventually, one piece of evidence changed the entire direction of the case. A cell phone video recorded by Paul Murdaugh only minutes before the murders. The video appeared ordinary at first. Friends discussing dogs near the kennels. Background conversation. Nothing that sounded important until investigators focused on the voices. Because according to prosecutors, Alex Murdaugh could be heard in the background of that recording. That mattered for one reason. Alex had repeatedly claimed he was not near the kennels shortly before the murders. So when investigators believed Alex Murdaugh had lied about being near the kennels, the question stopped being simple. it became psychological. What was he trying to protect? His reputation, his secrets, or himself? As investigators dug deeper into Alex Murdaugh's life, the murder stopped looking isolated. Instead, authorities began uncovering what prosecutors described as a years-long pattern of financial deception, fraudulent transactions, manipulated accounts, millions of dollars allegedly stolen from clients, law partners, and vulnerable victims. People who trusted Alex Murdaugh later learned prosecutors believed he had been stealing from them for years. Some clients were severely injured, some had lost loved ones, some believed Alex was helping them survive devastating moments in their lives. Instead, prosecutors argued he had been quietly exploiting that trust behind the scenes, and as the financial investigations intensified, the carefully maintained reputation surrounding Alex Murdaugh began collapsing publicly. The respected attorney, the successful family man, the powerful legal figure from a celebrated Southern dynasty, all of it was beginning to fracture at once. Then came another shocking development. Only a few months after the murders, Alex Murdaugh reported being shot on the side of the road. At first, the incident sounded like another violent attack connected to the family, but investigators later alleged the shooting had actually been arranged by Alex himself as part of an insurance fraud scheme. By then, public perception surrounding Alex Murdaugh had changed dramatically. The grieving husband image was disappearing, and in its place, a dark portrait was emerging. A man prosecutors argued had spent years manipulating reality itself, financially, emotionally, legally, and eventually investigators reached a conclusion that stunned the country. They believed the murders were connected to the downfall of Alex Murdaugh's hidden life. The murder trial of Alex Murdaugh began in January 2023. Prosecutors argued Alex murdered Maggie and Paul to distract from the financial issues surrounding him. According to the state, the murders created sympathy, delayed scrutiny, and bought him time as pressure closed in from every direction. They pointed to cell phone evidence, location data, timeline inconsistencies, and Paul's kennel video placing Alex near the victims shortly before the killings. The defense argued the case remains entirely circumstantial. No eyewitness, no murder weapon recovered. No direct forensic evidence conclusively proving Alex Murdaugh pulled the trigger. But as testimony continued, the emotional atmosphere inside the courtroom began changing. Every day of testimony seemed to strip away another layer of the reputation surrounding Alex Murdaugh. The respected attorney, the powerful family man, the grieving husband. And underneath those layers, jurors were forced to decide what remained. Because by that point, the courtroom was no longer simply evaluating evidence, it was evaluating credibility itself. Could Alex Murdaugh still be believed? Or had years of manipulation destroyed the possibility completely? Because this trial was no longer only about whether Alex Murdaugh had lied. He already admitted that. The question now was whether the lies led to murder. Then came one of the most dramatic moments of the entire trial. Alex Murdaugh took the stand. For days, jurors watched him testify about the murders, the financial crimes, and the lies he admitted telling investigators. At times, he appeared emotional, at times defensive, at times persuasive. But prosecutors pressed aggressively on the contradictions in his story, especially his repeated denials about being near the kennels before the murders. Alex claimed that paranoia tied to an opioid addiction contributed to his dishonesty. But prosecutors argued the lies revealed a consciousness of guilt. And for many people watching the trial unfold, that admission became the emotional turning point of the case. Because once someone admits lying during a murder investigation, every explanation afterward becomes harder to separate from manipulation. And after weeks of testimony, the jury reached its decision. By the time closing arguments ended, the courtroom no longer felt divided between two versions of the truth. It felt like the final chapter of something that had been collapsing for years. And eventually, the jury was left with one central question. Did the lies surrounding Alex Murdaugh end with financial crimes, or did they end in murder? After less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Alex Murdaugh stood as the verdict was read. Guilty of murdering Maggie Murdaugh. guilty of murdering Paul Murdaugh, guilty of 2 weapons charges connected to the killings. Alex Murdaugh was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But the legal story did not end there. In the years that followed, serious allegations began to emerge involving the county clerk of court, Becky Hill. During the original murder trial, Hill had become an unusually visible public figure. She gave interviews, appeared in media coverage, and later published a book about the trial after Alex Murdaugh's conviction. But defense attorneys soon accused Hill of crossing a line no court official is ever supposed to cross. They claimed she made comments to jurors during the trial, comments that appeared to suggest Alex Murdaugh was guilty. According to affidavits and later testimony, some jurors alleged Hill warned them not to be fooled by Alex Murdaugh's emotional testimony. Others claimed she encouraged jurors to watch his body language closely, as if she was steering them toward a conclusion before deliberations had ever begun. The defense argued Hill's behavior was not accidental. They claimed she may have been influenced by the extraordinary national attention surrounding the case. Investigators later examined allegations that Hill had pursued media appearances, book deals, and personal recognition connected to the trial itself. The concern was no longer just whether Alex Murdaugh was guilty. It became whether the jury had been allowed to reach the decision completely free from outside influence. For many people, that possibility was deeply unsettling, because regardless of how strong the evidence appeared, the legitimacy of a verdict depends on the fairness of the process behind it. The South Carolina Supreme Court agreed the allegations were serious enough to undermine confidence in the trial. In a unanimous decision, the court ruled that Becky Hill's conduct affected the jury process, and that Alex Murdaugh had been denied his constitutional right to a fair trial. His murder convictions were overturned, and a new trial was ordered. But even though the murder convictions were overturned, Alex Murdaugh did not walk free. By then, the financial crimes surrounding him had already resulted in dozens of separate charges. Prosecutors accused him of stealing millions of dollars from clients, from his own law firm, and from the vulnerable victims who trusted him during some of the worst moments of their lives. Alex Murdaugh received a 40-year prison sentence for financial crimes, including fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. In South Carolina State Court, he received an additional 27-year sentence tied to financial theft and fraud schemes. The combined punishment is likely to keep him in prison for the rest of his life. And through it all, one figure remained caught in the middle of the collapse: Buster Murdaugh, Alex's surviving son. Throughout the investigation and trial, Buster continued standing beside his father. He testified for the defense, sat directly behind Alex inside the courtroom, and after the guilty verdict, he publicly maintained he did not believe his father had murdered his mother or brother. In later interviews, Buster said he believed the real killer might still be out there. And as of May 2026, the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh are once again awaiting trial. No new trial date has been announced. This is Karma Case File number 9. For generations, the Murdaugh family name carried power through the South Carolina Lowcountry. Influence, reputation, a dynasty woven into the justice system itself. And for a long time, that power appeared untouchable. But some people spend as many years escaping consequences. But then there comes a time where they begin believing consequences no longer exist for them at all. That influence can outlast truth. That reputation can outlast damage. That power can outlast reality itself. But reality waits, and eventually, every lie begins collapsing inward all at once. And at the center of that collapse were Maggie and Paul Murdaugh, a wife, a son. 2 lives permanently lost inside a story far darker than the image the world once saw from the outside. Because sometimes karma is not a single moment. Sometimes it's watching the life someone carefully constructed slowly become the very thing that destroys them. And in the end, the power surrounding Alex Murdaugh could delay consequences for years, but it could not protect him forever from what he had become. I'm Justin Luther, and these are the Karma Case Files.